Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for making the time to come to this presentation. I would like to say that this is the first time I'm giving a Zoom presentation, so I'll do my best, but it's kind of completely new to me. I hope you can enjoy it. Now, my co-author, Lin Tian, is also present, so later on she may help with answering some of the questions. Okay, so the overview of the talk will be as follows. I will start by giving some background about how much Chinese households really save. And for those of you who have taken my module, the China and the World Economy module, you will know the answer to this question already, but other people may not. So it may be good to give them a little bit of a background. After that, I will have an introduction to this paper, and then talk very shortly about the literature related to my topic, and then about our contribution. And then I will briefly highlight the hypothesis that we're going to test, and then present our data and some descriptive statistics, and then our results, and then have some conclusions and policy implications. So for those students who are in their second year, next year you will have to do an extended essay. And this is kind of exactly the structure that you would give to an extended essay. And if you have a structure like this, you could do a very good work in an extended essay. So, okay, how much do Chinese households really save? So here are some data from the OECD, for some countries in the OECD in 2018. And we can see that the saving rate in the US was about 8%. In Germany, it was higher, about 11%. In Italy, which is my country, it was about 2.45%. And in the UK, it was less than 1%. So these are kind of saving rates in several OECD countries. And now what about China? China shows a much higher and rising saving rate. The saving rate in China is between 25 and 35%, depending on how you measure it, basically. And this is kind of some data which compares the saving rate in China and in the US. And China is the red curve, and the US is the blue curve. And you can see that the saving rate in China goes to about 30%, and in the US it goes kind of down instead of going up. So there is kind of a very different behavior in the saving rate in China and the US. And China is like very, very high saving rate, and it's kind of going up, up, and up, okay? And the US is low, the UK is low, Italy is low, okay? So that's just to give you a general overview. And then now we come to our specific topic, and we come to this paper in particular. So here is the introduction to this particular piece of research that I am going to present. Okay, so I would like to talk about two very interesting stylized facts that characterize the Chinese economy. And the first one is that although kind of there has been a lot of developments in the Chinese financial system recently, China still accounts for about 13% of the world's unbanked, okay? So according to a survey by the World Bank in 2015, about 20% of Chinese adults had no bank account at all, okay? And if you look at adults in rural China, about 26% had no bank account, okay? And then in line with these statistics, our data show that about 98% of the people aged 45 and over hold cash, but more interestingly, 72% of people in China, these are people aged 45 and above, so over 72% only hold cash as a safe asset. So what do I mean by safe assets? Safe assets are basically including the cash and bank deposits. So here we look at the ratio between cash and cash plus deposits, and we find that 72% only hold cash as a safe asset. So which means that they either don't have a bank account, or if they have it, they don't use it. They don't hold any bank deposits at all. So 72% of these people only hold cash as a safe asset. This is a very high number. Okay. So that is kind of problematic in a sense, because if you put your money in a bank deposit, then the bank will use this money to lend it to other people, and the money will circulate in the economy. However, if you hold the money, your savings in the form of cash, okay, you may put it in your mattress at home. So you may have a mattress full of cash, which may be very comfortable to sleep in, but that's not good because this money will not circulate in the economy. Okay, so this money will be useless because it will sit in your house, in your mattress, and nobody can use it. So it will not be used to lend to other people. It will not fuel the economy in any way. So the fact that Chinese people hold so much cash at home is not beneficial for the economy. Okay, so this is the first stylized fact, which says that Chinese people hold a lot of their savings in the form of cash. So not only do these people save a lot, but they save in the form of cash, which is kind of useless in a sense. Okay. Now, that was the first stylized fact. Next, we move to the second stylized fact. Basically, the Chinese population is kind of not very healthy. So we're talking here about physical health, and the Chinese population is not very healthy. So some data have shown that about only 19% of people aged 45 and above perceive their health status as being good, okay? So if you ask people, how do you feel your health is it poor? Is it kind of fair? Is it good? Is it very good? Okay, only 19% of these people felt that their health was rather good. And then if you ask people, do you feel your health has become worse since 2 years ago? About 47% of respondents perceive that their health has become worse. So perceive that their health has deteriorated over the past 2 years, okay? And then if we look at people who have kind of been diagnosed with a new acute or chronic condition, there are about 23% of these respondents who have been diagnosed with a new acute or chronic condition. So the health of the Chinese people is not very good. They don't perceive it as good. And in several cases, the health of these people is deteriorating, and people have kind of shown new health conditions in the last couple of years. Okay. So this is the second stylized fact that we look at. So the question that we want to ask, in this paper is whether there is a link between these two stylized facts. So again, to remind you, the first stylized fact is that Chinese people hold a lot of their savings in the form of cash. And the second stylized fact is that the health of Chinese people is not very good and is getting worse. So are these two stylized facts linked in a certain way, yes or no? That is what we want to answer in this paper. And in particular, we want to look at health shocks. And we want to look at whether the extent to which the health shocks can explain the tendency of Chinese people to hold so much cash. Okay, so this is our basic research question. And now, when we kind of write a paper, we want to link it to the existing literature and link it to what other guys have done. And then show what do we do in this paper that is new and that nobody else has done. So when second-year students will come to the third year and have to do an extended essay, you will have to find a topic, and this topic will be kind of related to the literature. You will read literature on the topic, find what other guys have not done, and then that is what you will be doing, filling a gap in the literature. Okay, so I'll show you what we do here. Okay. So there is a vast literature which has looked at how health shocks affect portfolio choice. So basically what this literature has looked at is at whether households have a tendency to hold shares or stocks in their portfolio. So shares and stocks are risky assets. And basically what this literature has shown is that people who experience health shocks, so people who get diagnosed with a new disease or people who have poor health in general, they tend to hold safer portfolios. So they tend to hold less risky assets, less stocks, less shares in their portfolios. But most of these studies have focused on developed countries. Very few have looked at health and portfolio choice in developing countries. Okay, so what do we do in this paper that other guys have not done? So what gap in the literature do we fill? Okay, so first we investigate household portfolio choice looking at the perspective of cash holdings in China. So again, as I said, most of the literature that has linked cash, that has linked health or health shocks to portfolio choice has looked at portfolio choice from the point of view of the tendency of people to hold risky assets. Do people with health shocks hold risky assets, yes or no? And they found that if your health is poor, if you have a new disease, you will be less likely to hold shares in your portfolio. However, what we do is we don't look at the kind of tendency of people to hold risky assets like shares, but we want to look at the perspective of cash holdings. So we want to see whether people who have experienced health shocks, so people who have been diagnosed with a new disease, would these people be more likely to hold cash in their portfolio? And nobody has looked at this issue looking at cash holdings. So we're the first to do this. We fill a gap in the literature, okay? And then we look at the Chinese context also. And again, nobody had looked at the links between health and portfolio choice in China, and we are the first to do this, okay? So that is our first contribution, okay? We're the first to look at how health conditions affect the kind of tendency of people to mainly hold cash in their portfolios in China. The second contribution, I'm not going to go over the details of this because it is mainly econometric. So we use very sophisticated econometric techniques accounting for unobserved heterogeneity, initial conditions, and state dependence. So I'm not going to explain this because this is very technical. But our paper makes also a methodological contribution, okay, which is quite important. And then third, the papers that have looked at health and portfolio choice, they have looked mainly at whether people have good health or not and how it affects portfolio choice, but also they have looked at health shocks, but maybe only focusing on one health shock. Here, we look at the same time at three measures of health shocks, three different health shock indicators. And these are the following. First, we look at a subjective indicator of health shock. So we look at a question which asks people whether, since the last survey that they had, whether their health has become worse. So it's a self-reported deterioration in health shock. At the same time, we look at whether people have had experienced the onset of a new acute condition, which was diagnosed since the last interview. And then the third, we look at whether people have been diagnosed with a new minor chronic condition since the last interview. I'm going to explain what these conditions are in a second. But what I want to say now is that our contribution here is that we don't look at only one health shock, but we look at three types of health shocks. Two of them are objective, and the first one is subjective. So by looking at three different indicators of health shocks, we can get a more comprehensive picture about how these health shocks affect the people's portfolio choice. So these are our contributions, basically. So three contributions were the first to look at how health shocks affect the tendency of people to hold cash in their portfolios in China. And then second contribution is technical. Third contribution is that we look at several health shocks at the same time. Okay. So now, what are the hypotheses that we want to test? Okay. We have mainly three hypotheses. Okay. And the first one is the following. So we hypothesize that if we experience an adverse health shock, okay, we're going to have a higher probability of holding only cash as a safe asset. And second, people are going to hold a higher proportion of cash, of safe assets in the form of cash. So the hypothesis is kind of twofold. We say people who experience an adverse health shock will be more likely to hold only cash as a safe asset in their portfolio. And second, they will they will show a higher cash ratio in their portfolio. So the ratio of cash divided by cash plus deposits will be higher, okay? And basically, we need to kind of mention one important thing here to justify this hypothesis. In China, basically, they don't have the NHS. So basically what happens in China, if people get ill, they, in most of the cases, they will be supposed to pay the medical costs by themselves. So they will have to pay the medical expenses upfront. Now, there are some medical insurance in China, but they don't cover all of the expenses. They will only cover part of the expenses. So the idea here is that there is no NHS, and if you have a health shock, you need to see the doctor and pay several out-of-pocket medical expenditures, then you will be responsible to pay yourself for a big share of these expenditures. So for this reason, we expect people who experience health shocks to hold more cash in their portfolio. And another reason why this is the case is that here in this paper, we look at people based in the rural areas of China, okay? So in rural villages in China, often there is also no bank. So if you don't trust like online banking and these kind of things, okay, if you have a health shock, you need to see a doctor, you need to pay the doctor, you don't want to have to travel to another city which has a bank if your city doesn't have a bank. So if you hold cash at home, you're more safe, because if you have a disease, you need to see a doctor, you have the cash to pay the doctor. You don't need to first go to another village that has a bank and then go to the doctor with the cash to be able to pay him. The reason for this is that many villages in China don't have a bank. So if you need to pay the doctor, you don't want to need to go to the bank physically, which may be costly because you may need to travel to another village or city that has a bank, and you may have to pay the bus to go to this city and to catch the cash that you need to pay the doctor. You want to avoid that. So if you have another adverse health shock, it is more safe to hold cash at home instead of other forms of safe assets. Okay, so the main two kind of reasons why we believe this hypothesis is true. One is that there is no NHS, and in China, if we have a health shock, we need to see doctors, pay doctors by ourselves. And second, okay, there may not be a bank in our village, and so if we hold cash at home, we can pay the doctor directly without needing to go to another village to get the cash that we need to pay the doctors. So this is the main hypothesis that we want to test. Now, the second hypothesis, okay, we expect the link between health shocks and cash holding to be stronger for people whose insurance does not provide immediate reimbursement. Now, as I said, there is no NHS in China, but some people have some insurance, medical insurance, and some of this medical insurance kind of predict the immediate reimbursement. So we pay the doctor ourselves, but the insurance pays us back immediately. Okay, that doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, okay, even though we have to pay the doctor ourselves, we get immediate reimbursement. In that case, the link between health shock and cash holding is kind of not very strong. But if our insurance doesn't predict immediate reimbursement, we will get some money back, but that may happen much later, in 5 months' time, in 6 months' time. Okay, so if you don't get immediate reimbursement, the reimbursement will happen, but it will happen quite late. In that case, the link between health shock and cash holding is going to be stronger. So basically, if our insurance doesn't allow for immediate reimbursement, then the link between health shock and cash holding will be even stronger. So that is our first hypothesis. And then the second hypothesis is that, okay, if we live in a village which has no bank, then the link between health shock and cash holding is going to be even stronger. Why is that? Well, if there is no bank in the village, okay, then, okay, we may pay the doctor using kind of online banking or card or bank card, but if we live in a village, if we're in a rural village in China, we may not trust very much digital payments and bank card payments. So again, if we live in a rural village in China, we kind of prefer to pay by cash, okay? So one option, okay, we don't trust bank card payment or digital payments. One option would be, okay, we go to the bank and we get the cash that we need to pay the doctor. However, if there is no bank in the village, again, we may have to travel to another village to get the cash that we need from the bank. But that will be costly, that will take time. So this is not going to be a very good option. So if we have a health shock, if we experience a health shock, and there is no bank in the village, then we're going to have a higher tendency to hold cash in order to pay the doctor, okay? If there is a bank in the village, then, okay, we can always go to the bank to get the cash that we need. So if we have a cash shock, a health shock, then we don't really need to hold more cash at home because we can go to the bank, which is around the corner at any time. But if there is no bank in the village and we have a health shock, we expect to have to pay doctors and that may be expensive, then we will have a higher tendency to hold cash at home. So the link between between health shock and cash holding is going to be stronger, okay, if we don't have a bank in the village. Okay. So basically, these are the three hypotheses that we test. The first is kind of the main hypothesis. Having a health shock is associated with a higher probability to hold only cash in our portfolio and with a higher cash ratio, okay? That again, because there is no NHS, health shock means higher medical expenses, so we want to have more cash in order to pay the doctor, hypothesis 1. And hypothesis 2 is if we do have a health insurance which provides us with reimbursement straight away, then, okay, it may not be that important to hold cash. But if our insurance will pay our medical expenditures much later, then, okay, we really need to hold more cash at home if we have a health shock. So the association between health shock and cash holding is going to be stronger if our insurance has a delayed reimbursement. And again, note that even if we have cash health insurance in China, they will not pay 100% of the expenditures. In any case, they will only pay a proportion of our medical expenditures. Okay, but if they pay this proportion of our medical expenditures immediately, then we will have a lower tendency to hold cash as a result of a health shock. Okay, and then hypothesis number 3, the link between the health shock and the tendency to hold cash is going to be stronger if there is no bank in the village. Because in that case, we may need to see the doctor immediately and have to pay him, and we kind of don't want to have to go to the bank before seeing the doctor because that may be costly. Going to another village is costly. And so if there is no bank in the village, we want to hold as much cash at home as possible to be able to pay the doctor without having to go to another village to get the cash that we need. So these are the 3 main hypotheses that we want to test in this paper. Okay. And then I want to talk about our data and have some descriptive statistics. Okay. So our data comes from 3 waves of the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Survey. Okay. This is a survey that covers people who are in the middle age or older age. So they are 45 and above. And we focus only on the rural residents, again, because these issues are more pronounced in rural areas than in urban areas. Okay. And we have about 8,500 individuals in each of the 3 waves, 2011, 13, and 15. Okay. So what are we looking at? The main variables that we're looking at are the following. So one is the probability of holding only cash as a safe asset. So we have a dummy variable, which is equal to 1 if the respondent only holds cash as a safe asset, and which is equal to 0 otherwise. That is our first dependent variable. And then the second one is the cash ratio, again, which is the ratio of cash over cash plus bank deposits. Okay, so these are the 2 main dependent variables that we look at. Okay, and then what are the indicators of the health shocks that we are considering? The first one is subjective, and it is a dummy variable equal to 1 if the respondent reports that he or she has experienced worse health status compared to the last interview. and it is 0 otherwise. So people are asked, compared to the last interview, which was 2 years ago, again, the years that this survey is carried out are 2011, 13, and 15. So basically, in each of these waves, the individual is asked, compared to the last interview 2 years ago, has your health been better, the same, or worse? Okay, and if the guy reports that his or her health was worse, then we have a dummy variable equal to 1, so he experienced a kind of negative health shock, and then it's 0 otherwise. Then there is another measure of health shock, which is objective this time. So we create a dummy variable which is equal to 1 if the respondent has been diagnosed with a new acute condition since the last interview, and it is 0 otherwise. So acute conditions are things like the cancer, the chronic lung disease, the heart attack, or the stroke. These are examples of acute health shock. Okay, so this dummy variable is 1 if you experienced one of these health shocks since the last wave, and 0 otherwise. And then the last one is, again, a dummy variable equal to 1 if, since the last interview, you experienced a new minor chronic condition, and it's 0 otherwise. So chronic conditions that we take into account are things like the high blood pressure, high cholesterol in your blood, high blood sugar, liver disease, kidney disease, or some emotional, nervous, or psychiatric problem, okay? Or arthritis or rheumatism, okay, and asthma. So there are several of these conditions. And these are kind of chronic conditions which are relatively minor compared to the acute health shocks that we looked at a moment ago. So again, 3 health shocks, 1 is subjective and 2 are objective. Okay, now we look at some descriptive statistics here. So basically what these descriptive statistics are. Okay, first let's look at the blue numbers in this table. Okay, these blue numbers here, the first one, tells us that about 46.6% of the people interviewed, okay, they kind of claim that their health has become worse since the last interview. Okay, and then 7.5% experienced a new acute health shock like cancer or heart disease or the stroke. And about 16.5% of the people interviewed experienced a new chronic condition like high blood pressure or asthma or rheumatism since the last interview. So this is what this tells us. Now, what we want to do here is basically compare the probability of holding only cash as a safe asset for people who experienced one of these health shocks and people who didn't. So health shock equals 0 means you didn't experience the health shock. Health shock equals 1, it means you did experience one of these health shocks. And here, the numbers I want to look at represent the probability that you hold only cash as a safe asset. So here, let's look at this number. This is for people who experienced one health shock. And it tells us that for the people who experienced the subjective health shock, 73% were holding only cash as a safe asset. But among those who didn't experience the health shock, about 67% of the people only held cash as a safe asset. So if you didn't experience a health shock, you only 66% of the people hold only cash as a safe asset, but among those who experience the health shock, many more, like 73%, hold only cash as a safe asset. If you look at the severe health shock, if you didn't experience the severe health shock, 69% of people hold only cash as a safe asset, but among those who did experience the severe health shock, almost 80% hold only cash as a safe asset. And if you didn't experience minor health shock, 70% only hold cash as a safe asset. But among those who did experience the shock, many more, 71%, experience or hold only cash as a safe asset. So what does this tell us? Is that the percentage of people only holding cash as a safe asset is much higher among the people who experience a health shock, regardless of which health shock you experience, okay, And among those who didn't experience the health shock, the percentage is lower. Okay. What about the cash ratio, the ratio of cash over cash plus deposits? Among those who experienced a health shock, the cash ratio is about 78%, 80%, or 76%. Among those people who didn't experience the cash shock, the cash ratio is lower, 72, 74%, 74%. So again, these descriptive statistics, they're only kind of means of the relevant variables, but they tell you that regardless of which health shock you look at, it looks as though those people who experience a health shock are more likely to hold only cash as a safe asset and are experiencing higher cash ratios. Okay, so these are descriptive statistics. Okay, what about kind of descriptive statistics by reimbursement ratio and bank dummy? What are these things? Okay, reimbursement dummy is a dummy equal to 1 when your insurer pays you the percentage of medical expenditures that they're supposed to pay immediately. Okay, so 36% of the people insured receive the payment of the medical expenditures immediately. Again, they don't pay all of the medical expenditure, they only pay part of them, but they pay immediately. In 36% of the insurance, of the insured people receive the payment from the insurance company immediately. Okay, so here D equals 1. If they do receive the payment from the insurance company immediately, D equals 0 if they do not receive the payment immediately. And you can see that the cash ratio is much higher, 80%, say, for people who are not paid by the insurance company immediately. And for those who are paid immediately, the cash ratio is lower, and the probability of holding only cash as a safe asset is only 73% for those guys who get payment immediately from the insurance company, but it's kind of higher for those who don't get the payment immediately. So it looks as though receiving the payment from the insurance company immediately, okay, is associated with a lower chance of holding only cash as a safe asset, and is associated with a kind of lower cash ratio compared to those who don't get the payment immediately. Now, bank dummy, it's equal to 1 if we live in a village with a bank. In that case, if we live in a village with a bank, okay, only 58% of the kind of people only hold cash as a safe asset if there is a bank. If there is no bank, 71% of the people will only hold cash as a safe asset. So it looks as though if you live in a village with a bank, you're less likely to only hold cash. And you're also less likely to hold, a lower cash ratio. Cash ratio is 63% if you live in a village with a bank, and it's 76% if you live in a village with no bank. So if you live in a village with a bank, you're more likely to hold deposits. Okay, so this indicates that indeed living in a village with a bank may be associated with lower cash holdings. So these are only descriptive statistics. They're quite interesting. What about results? Okay, what we do now is we estimate the models which basically look at how health shocks are associated with, 1, the probability of only holding cash as a safe asset, and 2, the cash ratio, which is again, how much cash do I hold relative to cash plus bank deposits. Okay, we run these models controlling for a lot of variables like age, education, whether we're married or not, whether we are migrants or not, whether we kind of have a mobile phone, and so on and so forth. So we have like very kind of comprehensive models with lots of right-hand side variables. Now here in the tables that I'm going to present, I'm just going to present the relevant coefficients, which are the coefficients associated with the health shocks. But again, there are lots of other control variables which I'm not going to talk about because we don't have time. Okay, so here, this table is regarding the model in which the left-hand side is the probability of holding only cash as a safe asset. Okay. Now, we have the in the red square, we have the coefficients associated with worse health. This is the subjective health indicator, equal to 1 if I think that my health is worse now compared to the last interview. This is the coefficient associated with the first objective health shock indicator, whether I had the onset of a new severe medical condition like heart attack or stroke or the cancer. And this is the coefficient associated with the new minor disease diagnosed since the last interview. Okay. Now the numbers are red and have many stars if they are statistically significant. Okay, for those of you who didn't take econometrics modules and so on, okay, if the number has no stars, it means it's basically 0. Okay, if it has stars, it means it's different from 0 and statistically significant. So in this table, what we find, in this column here, what we find, if we focus on new minor chronic disease, the number doesn't have stars and it's not red. So it means that basically there is no effect. The effect of having a new minor disease on the probability of only holding cash as a safe asset is 0. Okay, basically no effect whatsoever. Okay. However, if I experience a new severe health shock, then what this number says, it tells me that I'm more likely to hold only cash as a safe asset. So what this number tells me in particular is that if I experience a heart attack, stroke, or the cancer, then I am 5.6 percentage points more likely to hold only cash as a safe asset. And if I feel that my health has deteriorated, I am 2.7 percentage points more likely to hold only cash as a safe asset. So this suggests that experiencing a subjective health shock or a serious health shock like heart attack is associated with higher likelihood to hold only cash as a safe asset. So it looks as though our first hypothesis is somehow satisfied. Okay. Now, these models in columns 1, 2, and 3 do not control for wealth. Now, it is possible that if I experience a health shock, I need to see the doctor more often, I need to pay a lot of medical expenditure by myself. That means my financial wealth deteriorates. So if I don't put wealth in these models, like here, it could be that these effects, in fact, pick up the fact that health shock are associated with lower financial wealth. And so that may be biased, that may imply that these red coefficients here are biased. So in the next columns, we put the financial health in the models, and that appears with negative coefficients, okay? So, and it is very significant. So it is possible that not putting wealth in these models here is associated, it's kind of means that these red numbers are somehow picking up the omitted effects of wealth, okay? If I put wealth in the models, these are the correct models, in fact, because they contain wealth, which is very important, then what happens, the subjective health shock is no longer significant, and the new minor disease health shock is no longer significant, but the coefficient associated with the new health shock is still significant. So even controlling for the wealth effect in the model still tells us that if we experience a new severe health condition like heart attack, we're still 3.3 percentage points more likely to hold only cash in our portfolio as instead of holding also deposits. So if we experience a really severe health shock, we do prefer to hold only cash, because again, it's more safe to have the cash at home. If we have to see the doctor suddenly, we can pay the doctor straight away. And so this provides some support for our first hypothesis. The health shock is associated with a higher likelihood to hold only cash in our portfolio. Now, these are the models for the cash ratio. Let's only focus on columns 4, 5, and 6. this control for the financial wealth. And they also control for age, education, and all these other control variables, which I don't talk about in the interest of time. Okay, what happens now? Again, we can see that the subjective health shock is not significant, but the objective health shock is significant. And it tells us that if I experience a new severe health condition like heart attack or stroke, my cash ratio, cash divided by cash plus deposit, is going to be 2.3 percentage points higher. So again, these two tables that we have seen show that subjective health shocks and minor health shocks are not really important in affecting our portfolio. However, the new serious health shock is significantly associated, one, with the probability of holding only cash in our portfolio, and two, with the cash ratio. So experiencing a new severe health shock means we're more likely to only hold cash in our portfolio, and we're also more likely to hold a higher cash ratio. Okay. Now, what about hypothesis 2 and 3? Remember, hypothesis 2 was telling us that this association between cash and health shocks was likely to be stronger for people whose insurance scheme doesn't pay them immediately. Okay, so here we look at the probability of holding only cash in our portfolio, and we have two coefficients on the health shock. Okay, the first row here, these coefficients here, are for the people whose insurance scheme does not pay immediately. Okay, and the second coefficient is for the people whose insurance scheme pays them immediately. And column 1 here is for subjective health shock, column 2 for acute health shock, column 3 for minor health shock. Let's only focus on column 2, new severe health shock. What does this tell us? This number is the coefficient on the health shock, and so it tells us that if we experience a new severe health shock and our insurance company doesn't pay us immediately, then our probability of holding only cash as a safe asset is 4 percentage points higher. Okay. However, if our insurance company pays immediately, then the coefficient is not significant. So the effect of the health shock on the probability of only holding cash as a safe asset seems to be operating mainly for those people whose insurance scheme doesn't pay immediately. For those who get the payment immediately, the coefficient is not significant. Okay. What about cash ratio? It's exactly the same thing. Okay, if we experience a new health shock, then our cash ratio is going to be higher. Okay, the coefficient is significant, but this only holds if our insurance does not pay immediately. This is the first row. If our insurance pays immediately, the coefficient is not significant. So this provides support for our hypothesis 2. In fact, it tells us that the association between the health shock and the probability to hold only cash, or the cash ratio, is only significant for people whose insurance company does not pay immediately. For those whose insurance company pays immediately, the coefficient is no longer significant. So that is supporting our hypothesis 2. And then a similar picture appears for bank presence. Okay, so here we got first 3 columns, look at coefficient on health shock, 3 health shocks for probability of holding only cash as a safe asset. Last 3 columns look at the 3 health shocks and what effect they have on the cash ratio. Here, the health shock, there are 2 kind of scenarios. One, if we live in a village with no bank in the village, that is the first row. And the second one is for people who live in a village with a bank in the village. And we can see that the health shock only has a significant coefficient on the probability of holding cash only as a safe asset if we live in a village with no bank. In this case, if we have a severe health shock and we live in a village with no bank, then our probability of holding only cash as a safe asset is going to be 3.6 percentage points higher. And similarly, the cash ratio is going to be about 3 percentage points higher for people who experience the cash shock and live in a village with no bank. If they live in a village with bank, effect is virtually zero, no effect. So this seems to provide support for our hypothesis 3. Okay, so these are our main results. Okay, so let me just summarize the results and just give very briefly some policy implications. Okay, so we found that in rural areas of China, health shocks, okay, and essentially severe health shocks are associated with a higher probability of holding only cash as a safe asset, okay? And these health shocks are also associated with a higher share of cash in our safe assets, so with a higher cash ratio, higher ratio of cash divided by cash plus deposits, okay? And then we also find that if our insurance company provides immediate reimbursement, okay, and if we live in a village with banks, okay, then this kind of association between health shock and cash is kind of mitigated, okay? So basically the association between health shock and cash is mainly apparent for those people whose insurance does not pay immediately and for those people who live in village without bank. If insurance company pays immediately and if people live in a village with bank, these effects are much less apparent. Okay. Also, we found some other results which we didn't report in the interest of time. We found that the effect of cash of health shock on cash holdings, okay, is mitigated if the person lives in a large household with many adults. So suppose we live with our brothers and sisters. Okay, in China, brothers and sisters can be seen as a safety net. If I have a problem, I don't have money, I need to pay the doctor, I don't have money, I can always ask my siblings. Now, if I live with my siblings, okay, the association between health shock and cash holdings is found to be much lower. Why? Again, because if I have an extended family that can help me, then if I have a health shock, I can always ask my siblings for help. Okay, so in unreported results, we found that the effects of health shocks are much lower for people who live in large households with their siblings. Okay, these are the results. What about the policy implications? Okay, so if the government reduced these out-of-pocket costs associated with healthcare, or if the government made sure that the insurance companies paid for the medical expenses immediately, okay, or if the government enhanced financial inclusion by increasing the number of bank branches in the villages, okay, then Chinese people could have less incentives to save in the form of cash, okay. So again, Chinese people save a lot. Okay, but not only they save a lot, but also they save a lot in the form of cash. This money that they save in the form of cash doesn't circulate in the economy, so it's basically useless. How to make sure that Chinese people stop saving in this form? Well, one way is to kind of encourage the Chinese government to make sure that something like the NHS appears in China. So that may take very long time, but if they reduced out-of-pocket medical costs, and if they made sure that the insurance companies, rather than paying in 6 months or a year, they paid immediately, that would create less incentive for Chinese people to hold money in the form of cash. Okay, and then if they made sure that there are more bank branches in the villages, then people wouldn't need to save so much money in the form of cash, because even if they had a health shock and had to see the doctor, they could always go to the bank and catch the money if the bank branch is near to where they live. Okay. So this enhancing this financial inclusion by having more bank branches and improving the medical system would be ways by which Chinese people could be encouraged to save less in the form of cash. And that would be beneficial for the economy, because if they saved more in the form of cash, of the form of bank deposits, then the bank could use the bank deposits to make kind of the money circulate in the economy, and that would be beneficial. Okay. Now, these policy implications are particularly important because, as I said before, if you have many siblings, your siblings may help you in sharing the medical costs, okay? So if you have many siblings, you don't need to save as much in the form of cash because you can always ask your sibling to help you with the medical expenditures. But because of the one-child policy, people can only have one child, and so Chinese people don't have many brothers and sisters. So they cannot rely on their siblings to help them cover medical expenditures, so they hold even more cash, okay? So these policy implications are more urgent for the current generation of Chinese people who don't have brothers. Now, the one-child policy has been released recently, and so it is possible that in the future, people will have more brothers who help them out, and so these problems may become kind of less urgent going forward. But at the moment, because Chinese people don't have many siblings, then they cannot rely as much on family to help them. As a result, they want to hold a lot of cash. So it's more important for the policy implications that I highlighted above to take place now because of the fact that people cannot rely as much on family network to help with medical expenditures. Okay, now, in the light of the recent crisis with COVID, this has introduced even more uncertainties in the economy. So Chinese people may want to save even more because they don't know what will happen. The kind of virus now is under control, but it may come back. So people may feel uncertain and they may want to save even more. Okay, and so they may want to save even more, but that's problematic because now China needs even more consumption, given the new Cold War and trade tensions between China and the US. Okay, the Chinese economy cannot rely on exports as much. So, okay, the Chinese economy needs more domestic consumption. And one of the priorities of the Chinese government is to kind of enhance domestic consumption. But if people save so much, and if people will have more incentives to save because of the uncertainties introduced by COVID in China, people will want to save, and so domestic consumption will not go up. And so this will be a big problem for Chinese growth, which may kind of suffer severely, okay? So Chinese people kind of save a lot, and Chinese government wants that to reduce because they want people to consume more, because they can rely less on exports to fuel economic growth due to the problems with the US. And so if you want Chinese people to consume more, you want them to save less, but they tend to save even more. And because of the uncertainties due to the crisis, they're likely to save even more. So that's kind of a problem that the Chinese economy is facing in this moment. Now in the UK, it is exactly the opposite. Because in the UK, as we saw in the very first slide that I had, people don't save. So now, with the COVID crisis, people are kind of suffering lots of economic shocks. And how can they cope with this? Well, I mean, one way of coping with an economic shock is using up your savings. But if you didn't save before, you don't have any savings to rely, then you have a problem. You may need to kind of get indebted and so on. So the UK case is the opposite to the Chinese case. Whereas in China, people save too much. In the UK, they save too little. And so that is kind of an interesting thing. Comparative studies between China and the UK in the light of the COVID crisis could be like really interesting topics for future research. Okay, so I think I spent too much time already. So we'll finish now. Thank you for your attention, and thanks for listening to this presentation. And sorry for taking too long time.